we're going to start talking about some Battlefield news. This is how we decided to kick off the podcast, being the first one of the official LevelBF BFonPS4 podcast. And we're going to start off with some CTE changes, and these are the most recent news that we've had from the CTE, and the CTE is indeed bringing us some brand new aspects to Battlefield which we have not seen before, and some of which that we didn't even know about. So to kick it off, we have the reduced suppression mechanic and improvement to visual recoil. Now visual recoil will indeed match the recoil of your actual weapon, so we're going to jump into a quick discussion about this. Now, we all know that the CTE is making generally positive improvements to Battlefield as a whole, and generally the Frostbite-free engine status quo. So, Billy, how do you feel about these improvements, or so-called improvements that they're making?
Look, I don't actually necessarily dislike the improvements. To be honest, I don't think the suppression is anywhere near as bad as it was in Battlefield 3, so I don't have a huge issue with it. I actually do like to play with the recon class a fair bit with sniper rifles and DMRs, and obviously the suppression just kills these weapons, but to be honest, I don't think it's that bad. So it makes me wonder whether DICE will actually go through with it and reduce suppression to the level that they're going to, because they've already reduced it to some degree. Also, I think maybe, you know, if they do reduce it in this mode, maybe they can, you know, increase it in hardcore or something, because I feel like, you know, it is a realistic part of, you know, being a soldier in a battlefield. So, I mean, unless you want to turn the game into Call of Duty, then the suppression mechanic has to be there to some point. Personally, I think it's a good thing. Maybe not reduce it that much, but maybe a little bit from where it is now.
Yeah. What about you, Flaming? You've got some fairly mighty opinions on Battlefield.
Basically, I'm pretty pleased by this. Visual recoil, I think, has been something that's been really annoying. If you haven't played with like weapons such as the Type 95B, the G36C, you know how visual recoil is on those weapons. Your crosshair just bounces around the screen. They're really difficult to use because of that, and so I'm pretty happy to see that. Suppression, I'm not really sure how much to feel. Like, I think the suppression of this game is pretty good. I mean, if you play Battlefield 3, you'll notice a definite improvement, but I mean, I don't see why suppression should be nerfed even more, but I mean, it's not too bad as it is, but I can see why they're doing it, and I'm all for it if it's going to improve the gameplay.
Well, for me, I have to say, the visual recoil from the CTE is something that I find is very important. Now, something that you will notice with some sort of Battlefield guns is that they don't feel very realistic. They don't feel as though they fit. They don't feel very heavy or have any kind of connection to the sort of gun that you're trying to use. Now, I always thought of it as this way. The AK-5C has literally no recoil. There is barely a ton of recoil on that gun. It's got nothing behind it, but the crosshair on that gun bounces around as though there is quite a bit. And we all try our best to do recoil control. We get used to our guns, we use recoil control because we know our guns. We've played with them for a while now, you know, we're essentially prepared for it. But when it comes to new players, and players who don't necessarily know how to control recoil when they're first getting onto Battlefield, and they're shooting and their guns really stagnant, but the recoil on their weapon is flying everywhere, and they don't understand that, I feel as though that could be almost a game changer. It's kind of, I actually found it quite shocking that the visual recoil didn't actually match the weapon's recoil in the first instance. I honestly did not know that that was the case. And it makes a lot more sense now why some weapons don't behave the way they seem to. And as for suppression, well, I don't know. It's one of those things, you know, a image was released of a developer version of Battlefield recently, which basically explained how suppression worked, and your character was standing there, and essentially there'd be this huge circle, you know, this huge circle was covering the whole top area of the player, and this whole top area of the player was being, you know, completely suppressed, so any kind of shot within that zone would have caused some effect of suppression. Now, I don't necessarily think that we should have suppression completely removed. I feel as though that really shouldn't be the case. The degree of suppression is perfect, big improvement on Battlefield 3 as we mentioned, but I feel as though that circle of which suppression should take place. That circle of which suppression should be allowed to behave should be substantially reduced, so it's only sort of the upper half of your body. Because although obviously none of us really know, unless we've been in a war, what it's like to be suppressed or to be in some kind of combat, I gather that suppression would basically work through sort of the upper body layer, where bullets start whisping past you, which will make a lot more sense. So, for me, that I feel as though suppression should stay. I am a big fan of the mechanic. I feel as though it allows players who are using LMGs and allows players who are using machine guns to be effective, even though the gun isn't necessarily accurate.
I mean, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I mean, what use is having, you know, an LMG if you can't suppress people? I mean, in the real world, that's exactly what LMGs are for. And like you said before, you know, you were saying that, you know, we don't exactly know what, you know, suppression feels like, and that's true. But I would like to think that if I was in a war, if there were even remotely the possibility of bullets being shot in my in my general direction, that I'd be, you know, ducking for cover. I think suppression doesn't necessarily have to mimic what it does in the real world, because if it did mimic suppression in the real world, you know, realistically we'd have soldiers ducking behind cover and not putting their heads out at all.
Well, there's this general vibe that Battlefield players have, is like, look, Battlefield is not a military simulation game. It's not a military simulation game, which means that it's not meant to fully follow the rules 100%. And, you know, I'm down with that. I believe that that's legitimate, that makes sense. And, you know, for me, I personally, I always say, I do weapon reviews on my own channel. I speak about guns such as the MG4, and I've always said the primary aspect for an LMG player is to support your player in any aspect. That's why it's called the support class, because an LMG, although necessarily isn't accurate, although necessarily won't pick you up every kill in the world, it could definitely cause some damage on the other half, and I think that's important in game. Now, one thing that is that was recently spoken about as well in terms of recoil, in terms of weapon mechanics, is how long it will be till we actually see these implementations of the vanilla version of the game. And bearing in mind, on PlayStation and of course on consoles, when it comes to testing, at the moment we have been a little bit left out. We'll have to wait for a little while. So, you know, I personally would like to see these changes done swiftly on the CTE, and preferably seeing them soon on the console version, because they've made some really great improvements. We recently had a lack in screen shake on the CTE. They cut down the screen shake significantly to, you know, remove any instances where screen shake would be too significant. And it's things like that which really do make Battlefield a better game. It's a progressive sort of detail of the community providing support to the developers changing the game to make the game what we want it to be.
Can I just quickly interject of why that is that we don't get these CTE? Basically, if you weren't aware, guys, every patch for BF4 that goes through to come in the real game has to go through certification, which means Sony and Microsoft have to check it, you know, do all those.
Microsoft also charge for certification.
They also charge, exactly.
Yeah. So these patches take a lot longer.
Yeah, and also it means it costs some money. So basically, it's uneconomical for them to do a CT console, which is why we're very unlikely to see one. It's kind of unfortunate, but it's kind of important to note that's why the PC has this advantage over us.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, we're going to move on over...
really interesting, I had no idea.
yeah. It's a strange system, and it was a complaint that most indie developers have as well about both systems as a certification. There was a game on Xbox which was a zombie game called State of Decay, and that was nearly completely hindered, if not taken down, by just the basic principle that all patches were charged for. They couldn't fix the game and make it the best they could because patches are charged for. It feels as though we should probably it should probably be pressed to them that, look, you need to make a testing facility available for certain players. I mean, you know, we saw some betas come out recently, including the Hardline beta, which are great examples of how PlayStation 4 games and Xbox games can be improved just off a couple of hours of gameplay, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so we're going to move on. We're going to move on over to the next topic. Yeah, my brain stopped working. And this is basically something that Carl Magnus said. He is the head of DICE, and he said, what do people like about Bad Company? What is it that people really do like about Bad Company? It appears to not compute with him. So I'm gonna let you kick this off, Billy, because I know you're a Bad Company sort of elite. You came from those days of Battlefield. So what's your opinion?
Look, I think the best thing about Bad Company was, I mean, I think at the time, you know, if you consider the games that were out, you know, at the time, I think it released, shortly after Modern Warfare 2 or something along those sort of lines. I think it was pretty, like, it was the first of the modern Battlefields, and, you know, I mean, even Bad Company 1, I mean, if you go back and play Bad Company 1, it's sort of hard to get into it if you're used to Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4. Bad Company 2 especially just had, you know, like a smoothness and a flow to it. The single player was great. It had a sort of like a quirky sort of storyline. And the multiplayer was just like, I'm not going to say flawless, but it was awesome. You know, I could play that for hundreds and hundreds of hours on end and not get sick of it ever. And I think it's just because it's a hell of a lot more simplistic than Battlefield 4. There's a lot less weapons. I went back and played it recently, and you know, the maps are probably a little bit smaller, and there's a lot less weapons and attachments, but it's just simple and it works. And you know, the net code is good. Memorable maps, memorable weapons, that sort of thing. It's generally just a good game. And to the fact that DICE, you know, says, I don't know what you know, people really like about Bad Company is just shows it a little bit out of touch with the community, because, you know, if they don't know what people like about Bad Company, how do they know what to put into Battlefield 4 and Battlefield 5?
Yeah. Now,
because essentially that's one of the best games in the series.
For me, I'd say, you know, that was something that you know, when I saw this statement, I thought, look, you know, publicity speaking, you know, you just shot yourself in the foot. Now, Battlefield as a whole, and generally EA and DICE, have made good attempts to become more associated with the community, and they do a great job. There are lots of franchises out there which don't have the ongoing support that we do. We can go onto Reddit, complain about something, make a YouTube video about it, and essentially there's a good possibility that it will be addressed by at least somebody. And I personally really love that about Battlefield. But when I first, you know, heard about this statement, you know, what do we like about Bad Company? You know, it's crazy. It felt like, you know, you were the guys who built this magnificent game. You know, it's essentially meant to be your baby, and you don't know what we enjoy about it. What did you enjoy about it? What did you guys enjoy about the game? You're the ones who made it. And for me, Bad Company 2 was one of the greatest games that I've played on console. The Bad Company series in general got me into Battlefield. I to be honest with you, I was back in the days, you know, not to get hate from the chat or anything, I was a Call of Duty player. I used to play Modern Warfare 1, Modern Warfare 2 to the fullest extent, Black Ops 1 as well, and basically Bad Company got me into the game. And when I picked up Bad Company 2, you know, I'd read about this game, I heard it's, you know, got crazy destruction, it's a real military game, and I thought, you know what, I'll give this a try. It could just be an attempt, you know, and that was how I felt at the time. You know, it could just be an attempt at a good military game. And the things I loved about that game, I can give you a whole list here. Now, for starters, should we say, we had a great array of weapons. The weapons in that game, none of them felt useless. There are a ton of guns in this game right now in Battlefield 4 where it feels as though they have no purpose, you know, and it just feels as though some of the weapons in here, they don't have any relevance. Even some of the DLC weapons that we've seen, they don't seem to have much relevance either as to how we play. And that was something that Bad Company 2 did incredibly well. It adapted to our playstyles. And the second one for me was the varied environments that we saw. I remember Bad Company 2, one of my favourite maps, I can't specifically remember the name, but it was a really lush sort of jungle, and you progressed through it.
Valparaiso?
Yeah, I believe it's Valparaiso, something along the lines of that. And that essentially was one of my favourite maps ever. FPS games, hand down. You know, it was so well made, and this sort of diversity in environments is something that I thoroughly enjoy in games in general. Just seeing, you know, a good mix of environments, good mix of habitats, greenery, weather effects. And, you know, there are only a few maps in Battlefield which really change up that game at the moment. But in Bad Company 2, we saw some good sort of display of these environments. We saw urban areas, we saw forests, we saw jungles, we saw Arctic areas. That was brilliant for me. And I know this sounds ridiculous, but Rush on Bad Company 2. Probably the best game mode you'll ever see in Rush. You know, the complaint at the moment is Battlefield 4 is that Rush is sort of broken. Just go back to Bad Company 2. You will solve all of your problems with that game.
Speaking
Rush's
of
greatest.
Speaking of other good things about Bad Company 2, Celesco has just said in the stream chat, destruction was good in that game, and I'd say it was probably even more than good. You could pretty much level every building on a map. And that's just something you can't do in these games.
Describe about it. The destruction in that game was just like you could level the whole map, and it just felt absolutely awesome. I was very disappointed at lack of destruction in Battlefield 4. Like, a lot of this is just gone. I think they need to seriously reconsider that.
Visually speaking, the game is outstanding. You know, Battlefield 4 as a game is beautiful. It looks incredible.
It looks incredible.
And they've added all of, for example, let's take Dawnbreaker. Let's take Siege of Shanghai. They added all of these buildings, you know, and we were like, yeah, this looks like a really great map, but you couldn't level them. You know, admittedly, you know, it would be a strain to say, oh yeah, let's go level 7 skyscrapers in one moment. That would practically be impossible for a game engine at the moment. But what we'd rather have, rather than these really intricate map designs where areas are completely stagnant and don't move very well and don't have much destructibility, what we saw in Bad Company 2 was lots of environment and some areas, and these areas that they did like sort of build had incredible destructibility. And that's my phone going off. Great timing. Curse of the streamer. And yeah, that was it for me. That was just like the fact that on Bad Company 2 this destructibility was centralized in lots of different locations. And no area in that game, there was no area in that map where you could just go and say, oh, I can't destroy that. Everything could have gone down. You could have flattened a whole map. It's brilliant, you know. And I feel as though we have Frostbite 3 here. We're probably going to see Frostbite 4 essentially within the next, you know, sort of year or so. So why don't we see, you know, if we can, you know, redevelop that destructibility to be how we wanted it in the first place?
Look, I think that probably has a lot to do with the fact that the current game was developed for the old gen consoles as well. I mean, for instance, like I know there's a lot of talk in the PC community at the moment how different games are being watered down so that they compare to their console counterpart. And I think when you truly get the first, and I'm not going to say Hardline is the first one because Hardline is a different franchise in its own right. When the first proper Battlefield title comes around for specifically the next-gen consoles, I think that's where you're going to see the destruction come back as they can actually harness the power of the new consoles. And that being said, obviously the PC is still going to be a lot more powerful, but you know, you must admit that they really have tried to design this game to work as well as it can on the old gen consoles, and so they must have watered it down to some degree. In terms of destruction and that sort of stuff.
It was said like I initially said, you know, when I first got this console, not to expect much, and my reasoning is that look, 2014 when the consoles dropped, November 2013 was the PlayStation 4's release date for us. You know, we were in a transition period. We were in a period where games were already being developed for old generation, but were then being ported over to sustain a next generation feel as well. And this made a very difficult process for us. And I feel as though sort of late 2014 throughout 2015 as well, we're going to see the real, what next gen can really do. We saw some great examples of how next gen performs. A good example would be Killzone Shadowfall. That game looks, you know, I mean, the game isn't fantastic, but graphically speaking, it is stunning. You know, throughout late 2014/early 2015, we're going to see the true power that these consoles have. And of course, as these consoles become more powerful, it allows developers to be more creative, because it's probably fairly true to say that, to an extent, that old generation consoles did hold back PC development. And, you know, that's probably a fair argument. And at the moment, we're seeing this stage where games are being watered down on PC. We saw Watch Dogs get a thorough takedown. They left the files for the really good looking version in there, but never actually released them. And it's being said that this could possibly happen throughout all the Ubisoft titles. And Ubisoft, to be honest with you, strikes me as a company which really does not like their PC base. Assassin's Creed, good example of where PC just doesn't work for them. The controls on that are literally... I've never seen more complex controls in my life. And, you know, The Division was given a PC release date, but that was given quite late, actually. We saw the game announced at E3 with no PC tag, which was eventually dropped on later on. And we're even seeing other titles, for example, Activision dropping Destiny not on PC. It feels as though they're being quite restrained at the moment by certain development companies, and I feel as though next gen will probably be an improvement on that, or at least it should be.
Yeah, just letting you know as well. I'm rejoining the server. I just got caught in the revive.
Oh, that sucks.
A revive bug. That sucks.
Guys, if you're watching, please fix.
Add to your CTE to-do list, please. So I'm just watching a player at the moment, actually. Calico Jack, regular on BFonPS4. Our server which we run here, which, by the way, 5 to 7 PM BST, for those who aren't watching this live. And he is tearing it up with a minigun at the moment, just on the side of an attack boat. And I've got to say, this is, you know, a good example, because we were recently discussing CTE changes, where it's just something I really appreciate about this game. I just really appreciate the fact that, look, we've had our complaints about this. We've really have complained a lot about this game, but there is no other title that I can think of out there which has ongoing development improvements. Like, the devs listen to us. They make changes based on what we say. I don't see that anywhere else. I certainly don't see that in Call of Duty. I certainly don't see that in any other FPS. It feels as though Battlefield is keeping to its true and sort of keeping to its core. Although we saw that statement about Bad Company, which was quite distressing in some areas, you know, it's good to have that level of, you know, communication. I think that's really prime for us.